I'm using it, I'm not being honest about what my writing life is like.
When I think
Because
process for me as a writer literally means sitting in front of a computer or a notebook and then typing. Like, that's it for me. I don't sip tea or, put on mood lighting. That was never, I'm like, whatever people's version of that
you're not
person before it's
professionalizing
a typewriter.
something.
Yeah, it's very,
Right.
for me, it's like, it's an urge, like, I mean, not like sex, but close to it. Where it's like, oh, I got something to say.
It's not unlike sex.
It's
not unlike
like,
sex,
I mean, it
would
is
say.
like the ecstasy of finishing it. It's definitely
I have another
something.
question as an old woman sitting here. Being a Haitian, you're talking about smart. One of the great writers in the world is Edwidge Dadigan, who is
Create
Haitian,
dangerously.
right? And I'm wondering, what's the water you people are drinking?
Right.
We're getting some brilliant folks out of Haiti.
Yeah.
There's a whole, don't you think? I mean, look at what you're producing.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I can't look at you while you tell me.
They'll tell you that, right? It's too much. It's too much. It's too much.
I'm doing good work, but I don't know. I think Haitians, we're artists as a people, and we're also fighters. We're warriors.
Oh, right.
I don't know if you saw a couple of days ago, I take issue with the way it was presented because it's the New York Times, which we all know is a colonialist project. But they did this huge package on the debt that France forced Haiti to pay.
I saw it.
Over the past 2 centuries, and they make this estimation that CLR James, so many people have made before, but the Times has to act like they figured it out. $115 billion or something like that. So you have to imagine that weight. If you can like transfer that amount of money into psychological duress, that's what Haitians are raised under. So I can't, obviously there's not a one-to-one explanation, but I just associate my people with a real drive to survive to the point that, it's driven some people to insanity. And Dantika was the example that I think made my parents okay with me becoming a writer. Because they were like, okay, she could do that. Like when Crick Crack came out, what's really fascinating about the language that Haitian people speak, it's a Creole, right? And there are some Haitians who can't necessarily read it or write it because it hasn't been, there are efforts to codify it, in the past half century. But for people like my mother is in her early 70s, she couldn't read her language in school.
Right.
You have to imagine that split. It's horrifying to be speaking this language at home, to be speaking it when you're walking home from school, but you're learning, reading, and writing in French, which is also kind of the mother language of how the Creole came to be. And so the way that Haitians adapt, I think, is unique to any other culture in the world. And yeah, I don't even know why I got on this train of thought. But...
No, I think that's a very powerful thing, because when I think of Haiti, all the Haitians I know, I think this is a serious people. And the fact that, like,
we like to dance too, and we like to party.
Well, I was telling you backstage about dancing with Haitian men. It's a little bit different. But when I say serious, I mean, like, I feel like Westerners and even American Black people, we utilize the word revolution and radical even now, not necessarily carelessly, but it's definitely, especially for our generation, the word radical has definitely shifted its meaning. When I think of someone just saying love is a radical act, I don't think getting up, having sex, going to bed, cooking dinner, there's nothing to me like that that's inherently radical, even if it's loving. But when I think of radical love, I think of intervention for the other. Like, I am going to put myself on the line for you in some way to love you. And so I think when I think of Haitians, just connecting the two, I really think like revolution to Haiti is a word that means something. Radical is a word that deeply means something. And I think even, for you, Ms. Giovanni, radical is a word that meant something very serious to your generation. To my generation, we use radical literally at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as far as I know.
I recently saw this musical called A Strange Loop by Michael R. Jackson. And it's a meta musical about a young gay Black man who's trying to write a musical while working as an usher on Broadway. It's fascinating. You should see it if you have the chance. But there's a lot of commentary about kind of like the Chitlin circuit and how it makes the playwright on stage insecure about the kind of work that he would like to produce to the market, because the market wants Tyler Perry. He don't want to be Tyler Perry. And he's a snob, right? But there's also some truth to what he's saying. And in one scene, he imagines a conversation with his mother, who's Southern, she's very churchy, and he tells her what his play is going to be. And she says, that's very radical. And what was interesting is that the audience, which was a predominantly white audience, because this is on Broadway now and the tickets are like $100, they did not understand that radical coming from this woman's mouth, coming from her history, was a pejorative. Right. She meant to say that this is not a good thing, right? This is against the norm. And her, tragedy as a mother is that she can't understand the worth of her son and his gayness. And so I think it's interesting that our generation doesn't necessarily fully understand the origin of that word and what it used to mean and what it used to signal to Black people.
It signaled danger.
Generations ago. And I have to say, I empathize with people who maybe use words in ways that I wouldn't use them. Because what it is it's a reaching, it's a yearning, it's an aching. People do want to feel that they are important. They do want to feel that the love that they're giving to someone, even if it's broken, even if it's, mangled, is doing something for that person. And so maybe that's why they reach for words where if we want to be linguists or we want to be like technicians about it, we would say, hey, maybe that's not the right framework to apply what you're
nicer
about.
Than me because I think...
It's not niceness, though.
It's more... You're more tender than me, I would say.
I think it's curiosity. I'm curious about what makes
it bothers me. It bothers me deeply because for me, words are so serious. And I feel like they've become less serious over time. And when I think about what the word radical meant when referencing Assata Shakur, or what radical means when referencing Angela Davis. It means for me like people that were stepping out on like a very serious kind of love or scared and young as us, scared as us. But yet really we're like, I'm putting myself on the line. So I think when you use it as casual breakfast talk, for me, it diminishes, people that is the word when you think of them that they're associated with. And so I totally get it. And I think that's, it's generous, but it bothers me. So, I mean, Miss Giovanni, you're a professor. Like, how do you feel about it? Like,
I'm a poet.
Yes, right. I mean, for me, it's like, for me, you use radical the wrong way. It's like F on the paper.
But words are alive.
Yeah.
And so words grow.
Yes.
And so if we're looking at words, my generation, but if we look at words, it was radical in the 1800s or maybe the 70s to run away from slavery. Mm-hmm. But it was also radical to stay. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And when I live in Virginia now, when I think of the peanut, which is a wonderful thing, Virginia calls itself the peanut state, and Virginia didn't know diddly squat about peanuts. And I always think of it as a boy, as a Black boy who was sold by Africans, because we have to remember that the slave trade, there was a train running.
Yep.
And so the Africans sold to the Europeans who sold to other Europeans who got us here, right? That's a long story. I'm not going to carry you through that, but I always think of the grandmother, because it's, to me, everything is a grandmother, putting a peanut in the hands of this boy and saying, don't forget me. Mm. And somehow, going through all of it, going down that tunnel in Ghana, going through Middle Passage, coming to Richmond, being stood naked on a podium, being sold. He held on to that peanut. And in holding on to it, he finally is sent to a plantation where he's going to work for the rest of his life. He's going to die there. But he plants this peanut. Now, he's like all the Black men that we know in Harlem or in Bronx or any place else, right? They're just Black men being foolish. But he plants that peanut. So when his friends say, we're going to run away tonight, Harriet's coming. Come on, you can come with us. He said, I gave my word. I'm going to be here. And he doesn't try to explain to them that I put this peanut in the ground and I'll be here until it grows. Mm. But he stays, and that's radical. They call him a coward. They laugh at him. Mm-hmm. When they finally get wherever they can get, they sit and drink a beer or whatever it is they drink, and they say, oh, we left this fool down in slavery. He wanted to be in slavery. And then some white fool comes along and writes a book. Yeah, they enjoyed slavery. But what he did was he gave his word to his grandmother that he would plant this where he was, and he would be there when it grew. And this was a radical man, but this was a great man. And the woman that he married and they had children with, he couldn't marry her then because they weren't allowed to be married.
Right.
But they were in his heart. And they stayed and they watched that peanut grow. And they told their children, this is our home. If anybody asks you who you are, tell them you're a child of God. These were great people.
This changes me. Honestly, this changed me so instantly because now that does make like sitting at the dinner table, you know, radical. Coming home to a wife and a kid, radical. You know, the things that I think now, I just hear it and it sounds sometimes so trite. But when I think about how hard it's been and how hard it even is now to live a normal life, to go home and come back every day, like that's not a guarantee. You know, that could be radical. It seems even in the last few weeks like that is a radical thing, to go to the grocery store and come home.
I feel like what you're reacting to is the market. You're reacting to the commercialization of people's experiences.
Exactly.
It's like when you go on the subway and you see a billboard for some
Black is beautiful, and it's telling you some hair conditioner.
Right.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
I don't feel loved.
Right.
I feel like I feel like
you're being pandered to.
Pandered, but I also feel like people have made something, Black is beautiful was a very radical thing to say at a point in time. You know, that was like in the 70s, you said that and it was like, is it? And even Black people especially would be the people that would push back on those notions. But I think now it's like, don't make that history into a gimmick. You know, don't sell me back to me. Like the parts of me I like the most, the parts of me I see in the mirror, and I'm like, you know what, I'm getting the hang of this whole woman thing. Don't then sell it to me as razors, you know, or tampons. It's like, I just want to be, if you call me radical, it's like, you know, I love your poem, A Revolutionary Woman. That is my favorite poem.
Well,
Can I just say that? I just need to be serious. That is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Where she says, you know, I used to think, you know, I don't know if you want to quote yourself.
Oh, no.
No, you can't. I can't quote myself either. You don't know. But
Nikki doesn't know
yeah,
that.
I mean, I'm going to butcher it, obviously, but you basically say, like, I used to think that I was going to be the one to start the revolution, to stop the gun. But then I dug. She says, then I dug that if I could be a natural woman doing what a natural woman does, I would have a revolution. And that changed me. And that, for me, when I think of, like, being as a radical act, it's really that poem. Like,
Oh, thank you.
it's embodied.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I'm definitely a student.
No, I just think it's so important, and I say this as a grandmother, as an older woman here, and I do recommend Old Age, I really love it, that you like yourself. And what worries me about your generation is that most of you don't.
Yeah.
Most of you are not fond of, you don't, when you wake up in the morning, and I laugh at my students about that, and you're brushing your teeth, the first thing you have to say is, you know, I love you. Because it may be the only time you hear I love you in the day. Say it to yourself.
Yeah.
The first thing you do is smile to yourself. And then if somebody else, no matter what their so-called religion, race, whatever it is, if somebody's trying to be friendly, you can be friendly. Somebody will say, I don't know why you're friendly with that Jew. Look at what they did to, and they'll go, you know, on. That's not your problem. Your problem is theirs. And I had the experience of giving a lecture, which I gotta tell you was really wonderful. I'm not allowed to mention anything, but there were a bunch of women who worked in a big corporation. And they were trying to deal with, you know, everybody says that we shouldn't be here. And I said, you know, you're talking to an old woman. Do you realize that almost everybody that you're talking to wishes they were in your place?
Yeah.
That the reason that they're laughing at you is that they can't be? That you're walking into a boardroom and sitting down. Now, the next thing you have to do is to recognize that you didn't used to always be doing that. So you may as well say what you want to say.
Well, it's because I mean, for me, I spent my whole life wanting to be somebody else besides myself. And people wanted to be me, and I wanted to be somebody else. And it was a product of a generation that love is just so hard to find. It was hard to find in the house, like between my mother and father. It was hard to find, you know, when my body started changing and it didn't look like the Beyonce or whoever they were, you know, marketing at the time. It became very difficult to be like, this is the person that I love. And then I can't even imagine, you know, my younger cousins that are teenagers, and I speak in high schools a lot, that searching of being like, where do I find love? Where do I look for? And so I'll direct it back as a question, like, where do you find it? Where do you find it
don't find
easily?
it, you give it. It isn't lost, you give it. I mean, that's what amazes me. Love is something you give, and somebody will take it. But your job is to
But
give it.
what if someone takes it and doesn't give it back?
Well,
and I know people are watching,
that's their
wondering
loss.
that.
That's their
yeah,
loss.
and
That's
I think
not yours.
that comes back to that transactional thing that I was mentioning earlier. It's a generation that they say, if I give it, where am I going to get it? And it's kind of like a fix, you know? It's like, where do I get it?
But you're going to be twice as happy giving somebody. And if they don't give, that's their loss.
I heard that.
Are we talking about two different things, though? Are we talking about desire and then we're talking about love?
No, we're just talking about love. I'm
No,
talking
I'm
about
talking about- I'm
little
talking
old
about-
ladies like me running into girls like you.
Yeah.
And talking to you. We may never, as the song says, speaking, we may never see each other again. Or you may call me and say, I'm having a hard time. My job is to listen. I don't have to like you, let alone love you, but you're offering me some love because you know that you need something and that I might be able to give it. When my mother died, I called Tony because we were friends, Toni Morrison, and she listened. And Toni wasn't a great listener. I don't know if you knew Toni, but she wasn't a great listener. She didn't waste her time like that. And I talked for about an hour because I was sad, and she finally said, Nikki, write. She said, I have to go now. You go write, which was good advice. But Toni loved me, and I loved Toni. And that's the way we showed it.
Right.
And I don't know what you're saying here that you expect of love. You give love, and when people ask you for something, you do that.
Right.
You help. Love is a responsibility.
Right.
And you take on that responsibility because you're a grown person.
Right.
You know, you're not supposed to be at 8 years old feeding the family. But you're grown. You're supposed to be doing. So this is love. Now, somebody might say, oh, you know, you're too fat, you're too brown, you're too black. It might be anything. That's their problem. And so you don't want to be bothered with that person because they're a fool. And that's what I like about Jesus. And I'm a Christian. But I like the fact that the man on the right, he tried to comfort him, didn't he? We all know this story. We all know.
Yeah.
He tried to comfort him. And the man said, you say you God, but you up here just like the rest of us. And I like the fact that Jesus said, this is a fool, and I am not going to waste my time
And
on
looks
him.
to the left.
And he went to the left,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what we have to remember. There's always somebody on the left who needs and wants and will give us love.
Right.
And I really like the fact that when he rested, because he rested for those 3 days, and we all need rest. And when he came up, he went to see Mary Magdalene. He didn't go to Peter, because he knew Peter was not right. He didn't, none of those people.
Right.
He didn't go to your first pope. He went to Mary, and he said, you know, I'm your bench baby. When you need something, you call on me.
Right.
Didn't he?
Yep.
I like Jesus for that.
Do you want to speak on it?
Do I want to speak on?
Oh, you said, was I mixing up was I mixing up desire
Or
and
no,
love?
I guess I just mean to say sometimes there are situations I'm in where I realize what makes love love is that it's you stepping out of yourself in order to relate to another person, right? And if our generation is plagued by something, is that it's very difficult to step out of
of the
yourself.
self. It's a
because
mirror.
we live in a hall of mirrors. You look at your phone, you're looking at yourself. You go on Instagram looking at yourself,
Right.
and then on and on and on.
Right.
And so sometimes, you know, I'll be talking to a girlfriend or a they friend who has met someone and they feel like they're giving of themselves to them. But in reality, you hear the story, you hear all the interactions, and they're not really interactions.
Right.
Because they've been filtered by so many filters.
Projections, assumptions.
Exactly.
Right.
And so sometimes I have to catch myself and really consider if the emotion that I'm experiencing is something that is, you know, a channel to love, or is it a channel to desire? Is the feeling that I'm feeling really just inside of myself? And therefore, it's just about me relating to myself.
Right.
And using this person as a surface for projection. And more often than not, a lot of like the crazy making crushes that I experience or whatever, it's just me.
Right.
That person hasn't actually done anything for me because I won't let them.
Yeah.
Because I'm so stuck in my head and
No, there was so
I like
many
this
times.
Hall of Mirrors.
There was so many times where I thought that I was in love with a man, and then I find out that I really wanted to be like him. And I would, venture deeper and deeper, and I'm like, oh, he's so successful. Oh, he's so handsome. Oh, he's so wealthy. And the more I achieve things for myself, the more I realize I'm like, did I even love you at all? Or was I looking for something in me? And I think a lot of people, they're searching outside of themselves, like, so long. And for such a, you're laughing. What do you
No,
think?
oh, I'm smiling because there's just one of the songs I love so much, and I've never met her, is a woman, Bonnie Raitt, wrote it. A friend of mine, she cries at night and calls me on the phone. She sees babies everywhere, and she wants one of her own. She's waited long enough, she says, and still she can't decide. She's scared to run out of time.
Yeah.
And I think that it is funny because I'm at least 20 years, probably more than that, 30 years older. I'm not scared to run out of time, but you all are. And that's the way you treat your life. You're scared. I love Bonnie Raitt. As I say, I don't, and I've never met her. I love that song.
We do
Nick of
feel like
Time.
we're running out of time. Well, that is so much.
You
of
all
it.
feel that you're running out of
because
time.
there's so much. You're surrounded by such an apocalyptic feeling. This sort of the doomsday clock has been ticking. I feel like since I was born. Like I was born in '96. In 2000, they said that the computers were going to shut off. The world was going to end. 2012, the movie comes out and they say that the tide is going to change. Now 2020. They say pandemic, everyone's like, is the world actually ending? And then you get Donald Trump elected as president, might as well end because I was ready to end it. And then, so on and so forth. And so it's like, for you to tell me, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to hear from you that you're not running out of time. But I think that's why we feel this caginess towards love.
But
like, I need it now.
The thing about the apocalypse, though, is that it's an ending, but it's also a beginning, right? It's the end of the old world, which gives us an opportunity to rebuild. And so there's a way in which a lot of that apocalyptic pop culture energy is the yearning and the urging for something
a new
new.
world. Yeah,
right?
but it's still scary. I mean, I think it could be both. I think there could be that heart-thumping fear of endings, and
fear
also
is
like
good.
the desire.
Yes, 'cause we're back to the transgenders, because I'm totally convinced there's life someplace else.
Okay.
I know that if this earth is all of life, then a great mistake was made. And I can't believe that that big a mistake was made, so there has to be life someplace else. And I love the idea that the transgender students, youngsters, just like we, the anti-segregationists, my group was the anti, that they are preparing us for another world.
Right.
Which is so much like our old world, too. Our pre-colonial world.
Well,
Transness was
right.
gender.
I think as we learn to be more gentle with each other.
Right.
But again, as we learn to accept the fact that we name ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's the steps that we're taking. It's just we took. We're not going to be called, you can't call me a slave, I'm a child of God. When we work to be, I'm a free person, which everybody knows it. What's free? And we think about freedom as black people are not free, but you're not free if you're white, because then you have to spend all of your time making sure that the person you hate is black.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It all hate takes a lot of time too.
Yeah, Ms. Morrison said it was a distraction. She said racism is foremost
I
a
was gonna
distraction.
say.
Yeah.
So it's just really, I think it's, I know we're not out of time. That I do know. I know your generation has to know that.
Right.
We are not in the nick of time. For we who are Christians from not Catholic, but I grew up in the Baptist and AME church, we know that he may not come when you call him,
But
he always comes on time.
Right.
Well, one thing that you mentioned that I want to dig into more is hate, because you can't really have any kind of prolific conversation about love without talking about hate. And I think, it's abundant now, and I know it was abundant before. And so when I think about hatred, I don't even want to think about, the us versus them mentality that has entrenched itself in our world that is so pervasive today. But I do want to think about the fact that it seems like even amongst one another, even amongst black people, even amongst the left, even amongst, however you identify, there's not, I won't even call it hatred, but there's sometimes I feel a desire now to see one another suffer, to see humiliation happen. Thinking of cancel culture, thinking of wanting people to be punished for mistakes or shortcomings that often are very human. Do you see that? And how do we deal with that? I mean, I wouldn't sit here and say we're more hateful now than we were 100 years ago, because that would be, disrespectful to anybody living in the 1920s. Like, that's ridiculous. But I will say that there seems to be this thing that happens even amongst your community, a sort of sneering or hurt people.
I think that Clarence Thomas should be in jail. Because
and so should his wife.
Well, I was going to say, that was my next thing. Thank you. Okay. And because the idea of America was a good idea, and we all have to fight for it. And one of the advantages of being black is that black people have continued to believe in the Constitution. We have continued to believe that there is some goodness someplace, and I like that about us. But you say, but looking at Clarence, and then he's married to Virginia, and they tried to overthrow a dream that my people, we three sitting here on stage, have had of a better, not a great, but a better world. Now, if Martin was here, if he was the fourth person sitting here, he'd say, well, we have to love Brother Thomas because, no, Martin, we have to hate him because he hates us. And you can't love everybody. You have to pick and choose.
You can't love everybody.
You can't love everybody. Yeah. It's too many fools out there. And
June Jordan said, I need to be a menace to my enemies. That's what she said.
I knew June. I met her.
I'm sure.
And what's sad to me is that, and I say that to my students, I've just retired, by the way. What's sad to me is that I used to read the obits, I don't read the obits anymore because now it's my friends. Oh. And I used to collect, and I still do, those black stamps. When I started collecting stamps, it was, 7 stamps, Martin, Booker T. Washington, very, very few. And now, my latest stamp was Maya,
right?
Who was a friend. And I said, I can't have this.
Right.
Something comes up, it's a friend. My student said to me when Maya's stamp came out, they said, oh, don't worry, Nikki, because they like me. Oh, don't worry, Nikki, we'll get you. You'll be on the stamp.
Oh,
he's not on the stamp.
I said, no. To be on the stamp, you have to be dead. And they go, like, oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, don't head out yet.
You have to. I think, and this is what started, and I'll shut up, I think love is important. I think we have to know the difference between love and sex. And I think the sex, as I say again, I think the sex is a lot of fun. Anybody tell you it's not has had bad sex and needs to go and find some good sex. And the only way you're going to find that is that you step outside of yourself a bit. And that you quit judging who somebody else thinks had. Everybody thinks everybody else had better sex. So I don't do Facebook. Twitter, I don't do any of these things. But your friends are, oh girl, it was so good last night. Then why are you telling me? what do I care?
Right.
No, I mean, it's that kind of foolishness.
Yeah.
And what you want is something that you can count on.
Yeah.
You want a sex that requires vulnerability. And it is very easy to have non-vulnerable sex these days.
Yeah.
You just download an app, you see somebody, you swipe, 10 text messages, they're at your apartment, that's it. And so I think because we already have a culture that believes it's taboo to talk about sex, period. So then we're not even at the point where we're talking about pleasure, right? We're talking about it as a mechanical exchange versus the things that you might need as someone who identifies as a woman, having sex with someone who identifies as a man, right? That's a dynamic. And then it changes if you're a woman having sex with a woman. And there isn't a readily accessible vocabulary around pleasure, I think, for like the everyday woman who's just like waking up at 7:30, going to work, coming back home, right?
Yeah.
There are certainly communities of people who are really, affirmative and do spend a lot of time and take a lot of space to make sure that pleasure is at, the prime point of their lives. But for a lot of people, because of the way, I hate to use the word, but capitalism works, they haven't been able to unlock that part of themselves.
Well, I think part of that is that people, they're not having good sex. A lot of millennials and Gen Zers, they don't even have private space. I think about I grew up in the hood. Like, I grew up in East Atlanta and then East Oakland. And I remember when you were thinking about sex at 15, 16 years old, it was quick, fast, in a hurry because it was in secret. It was like, where am I going to have sex? Fast forward to my 20s, and living in New York, and I would meet young men, you know, that I was like, oh, this person's gonna be they're so handsome, they're moving easy, and they'd be so stiff and so like, you know, they want to get dressed right after, and I'm like, damn, is it me? But then I realized like this is someone that has lived with their parents, has never had a room of their own. This is someone that the partner that they're with has never had a space of their own. Like they're, you know, when they're in the bathroom, they're worried that someone's gonna walk in on them. There's not even that self-awareness, that space to just be, you know. There's like, I look at Spike Lee films of She's Gotta Have It or Waiting to Exhale, and everyone has all this space and they're lighting candles and they're having, you know, there's so much, you have your own personal sanctuary to feel safe and to feel like, oh, now I'm gonna put on some music. The average millennial Gen Zer, they're not, you know, going into some safe haven of 1,200 square feet and lighting candles and having a bathtub and inviting a man over on the phone. They're literally typing on the phone like, my roommate's not home, can you come over quickly? That's such a different world, you know, and I think, I don't know if you need space to have, you know, good love, but it sure is nice, isn't it? It sure is nice.
But you know, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about Fences, and I'm sure you've seen Fences.
Denzel Washington, yeah.
And you remember, you saw but you remember that Denzel finally got a girlfriend, you know, when he got the girlfriend, and he was saying, you know, I need her. I need my mistress, or whatever she was, the other woman. I need her because she makes me feel better. And Viola Davis, the wife, said, you think it's been fun for me? You think I've enjoyed you coming home on Friday, getting drunk and getting it? I just love that. Because I thought, you remember, I just thought, yeah, he's thinking, I need this to make me whole. And she's saying, you think that this has been fun?
Right.
Right.
That because I say to you, you know, oh, this is so good. Oh, you think I meant it?
Right.
I lied to you.
And she had needs that she could have gone out on him and satisfied.
Yeah.
Which also women have historically done.
Yeah.
You know, there might not be an archive about it in the way that there is for men kind of stepping out.
Women
in
have
their
always
marriages.
got theirs.
Always have had a piece.
Definitely.
Always have had a piece.
Yeah.
And that's partially because we have to separate love and romance from marriage. Marriage is an institution, right? It's an institution that for some reason people still want to participate in. Not me, but
Noted for millions of people. It's like,
that doesn't mean you can't message me, but I just don't want to get married. But marriage often kills romance. It often strangles love because it puts people in these really strict positions where you can only move, you know, it's like being on a checkerboard. You can only move in like 4 directions, right? Because you have this hole that you're stuck into and the radius is so short. And so I think a lot of, you know, for my friends who are women and who are straight, often the things that they're complaining about, I'm like, this is a choice. I understand that you feel like this is a script that we all have to follow, but you can get off the page. You can, you know, write on the desk instead of staying on the loose sleep all the time. And so, I don't know, it's interesting having turned 30. I'm seeing, not to say that my lifestyle is necessarily all rosy, like it's very difficult to be a single woman in her 30s, especially in New York City, but I do see people making choices that feel enforced and that the choice doesn't necessarily come from inside of themselves, as opposed to a knowledge that in order to reach a certain status in society, there's like things that you have to do.
Yeah.
Although those things might not be what you want to do. They might not give you pleasure.
Yeah. But Carolyn Franklin, who was a way better songwriter than people give her credit for, and she wrote it for Aretha, I know that a woman's duty is to help and to love a man. And that's the way it was planned.
Right.
And Carolyn's a great old gal.
I want you to comment
Did you know her?
Not well, because I was living in New York. I lived at 92nd Street. Of course, she was a village person. Of course, she was Aretha's sister, which put a burden on her. But she was a heck of a fine writer. And I think that we're only beginning to recognize that Carolyn Franklin was a good songwriter.
Right.
Well, I want to intervene on what you just said about marriage, because I know that that is a very popular notion amongst our generation, that marriage is a prison, and being partnered to one person ad infinitum in the institution of marriage is daunting, and it is hellish, and it is something that we don't necessarily, I mean, popularly across Gen Zers and millennials, we don't necessarily want to participate in. What do you think about that?
Well, I think most people still do want to get married, though.
Well, I would say that our generation, as far as, I mean, let's just say artists. Let's just even say like artists. Like when people talk about partnered love, this was like Jagged Edge, which was a very popular R&B group. I mean, they were top of the charts. They wrote the song Let's Get Married. You had popular singers singing like, it's time for us to lock this down and be serious. You don't have the top R&B artists now singing anything about let's get married. Typically now, when you hear love songs, it's about breaking up or getting over or, it's about escaping matrimony or escaping chosen partnership. It's about moving from one person to the next, and really it's centralized on like, what happened to me, or what is going to happen with me. It's not about the other person. It's almost like in love songs now, the other person is just a figment, and really the singer is like, this is what love is for me. It's not about partnership. It's not meet me at the altar, which was literally the lyrics. So I think that it is a popular notion in our generation that marriage is a prison, more so. Not necessarily completely, across everybody, but it definitely is a growing notion of like, what is it good for?
So one of the origins of the pop love song, right, is the gospel song. Which is to say that a lot of what the pop love song wants to achieve for the listener is what, church hymns want to achieve for the person who has come to praise. And so I think I love that you're kind of like focusing on the way messaging in pop music has changed over the past 20, 30 years, because in some ways, I think if it is true that there is an increased focus on the tumult of romantic love, that's really us going back to the blues, right? So it's kind of like the century looping back on itself,
right?
Which I think is really fascinating. And the thing about, whenever I'm thinking about what our generation thinks and what our generation does, there's always just such a large gap between our love of rhetoric, our love for talking about the things that we want, talking about the things that we want to do, and the way we actually live our lives. Which is often in like extreme conflict with each other.
I feel like that's true, but one thing that's also true is that we are longing, and I feel like our generation is incredibly lonely, and post-pandemic even more so. We're deeply isolated. So I think in some ways when we listen to music about longing and about quick love, you get everything you need from it and then you're alone again, it's based in a lot of people's lived experiences. And I think, if you all want to comment on that, on the isolation that we feel, the loneliness. I feel like your generation even just had more friends. You had a neighborhood of friends. You could wave. You had neighbors. A lot of people don't know their neighbor. I know my neighbors, but I've made it a real point. And honestly, a lot of times against their will, I'm like, let me carry your groceries. I want to know you. Like, I live with you. I need to be able to knock on your door. And a lot of people, that's gone. Or it's going. It's going even now.
You know what I'd like to see you do sometime, if you have a minute? I'd like to see you right on the front porch, because I think the thing that is most missing and again now, there's so many years between us, but the thing that is most missing between your generation and mine, really, is the front porch.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you sit on the front porch, you knew everybody, they walked by.
The world was walking right by. And you could reach out and touch it and yell and flirt and
But the deck, the deck, you don't see anybody.
My neighbors recreate it though. The sidewalk on my block is the front porch. Yesterday.
Yes, Flatbush.
Yes.
But see, you guys live in real cities. I live on a mountain. And again, not only the years, but where I live, it's not a city. And when I lived in New York, it was really different. But I haven't lived in New York in 35 years.
No, but even in New York, the metaphor of the front porch, even if you take it, like, we're deeply afraid of one another. Like, that's real. People are, and for good reason, the violence, the random violence that exists in America.
But also not good reason, too.
Exactly. I completely
Because of
agree.
Reagan, because of Giuliani, so much of these things that you're supposed to be afraid of They do exist, but they also don't exist.
Yeah, they're specters, they're
Right,
ghosts. But I mean, but
exactly.
even across the country, I would say, like, you know, one time I did this interview with a young woman. She was from Mexico City. She's a climate activist. And she says, point blank, if you can find the interview, social media is my country. That's what she said. And I mean, that is something that a lot of Gen Zers, you know, people even just a little bit younger than me, my younger sister's generation, they really believe that online is the place to socialize. And outside of online is a dangerous place where, one, you can't decide exactly how people perceive you. You can't control that notion. You know, and you can't choose, you know, whatever echo chamber. You might hear something that you don't like. You might see something. So it's best to just stay in the bubbles I create because the world is a scary place. Whereas my mom's generation, you know, she was coming up in 80s New York. She wanted to be outside. I mean, the outside that we think we have and the city girls generation has nothing on my mother, who was like, we're going to be outside all the time. In fact, inside was really just an idea. She's like, if we could be out at the club, out at the market, out at the park. She's like, I used to go to the park on Sundays and read the New York Times and just talk to strangers. You know, stranger now, the stranger is a very dangerous, dangerous thing in our mind. And I feel like that's a change. That's a shift.
Yeah, I think it is. But I mean, that's just, it's all, for lack of a better word, growing up, and you're saying they loop around, but it's all how different. Well, I'm 78, and you all are like 25.
I'm 30.
You're 30.
She has to speak on it.
That's
the
that's two
difference.
generations. Well,
Right.
Yeah.
and so it definitely, and people like me, I don't want to speak for my generation, but one of the things that I like about me is, is that I've done my job. So I don't feel like I have to try to tell you all how to live or what to do. I can only tell you what works for me and how I wish to be treated. So when we sat down here, you said, what do you want to call me? I said, my name is Nikki. Everybody calls me Nikki. I don't even know why now, because all of my family's dead. And I should have asked, why did you all start calling me Nikki? Because I was born Yolanda Cornelia Giovanni Jr., because I'm named after my mother. I should have asked why, but I didn't. So now I'm stuck with, as it were, Nikki. It suits me, but if you say what to call me, you call me Nikki, because that's what everybody calls me, and I'm not afraid of being called by my name. I just don't like to be called out of my name.
I heard that.
It's just so basic. And so I think that people like me, my generation, and I think that most of us need to think about that. We've done our job, and we need to get out of the way of you youngsters. We need to let you know we're a bench. You can come sit.
No,
you can come
honestly,
rest.
I feel like I would just have to say about that. So much of why I created this show and wanted to bring intergenerations together is because my generation, I feel, you know, I'm right on the cusp of millennial Gen Z. We're a proud generation. And I think that we have a vision for the world, but I still think that there's so many questions that people have. There's a real sort of longing and lostness. And I feel like your generation, you know, you're still living, you're not a stamp. You know, I want to be able to ask you, and I will just ask you now, you know, how do you cure heartbreak? Like, how do you get over the hard things? Because now with this pandemic, we're going through a hard time, and you can't just sit on the front porch, or, you know, and I can't, you know, call up my grandma who lives across the country, whereas, you know, generations ago that was unheard of, to be separate from your family. You stayed in the same neighborhood. It's like, how do you deal with that, you know? And I want to give you space for whatever you were going to say,
but I guess what I was just gonna, I can't believe I'm gonna add to something that Nikki Giovanni said, but if I may.
Yes.
I think there are people, though, of your generation who won't stay benched. It's the wrong people, right? There are so many people I think of, you know, even
They won't bow out.
Our government in America is a gerontocracy.
Right.
The youngest politician in America is not gonna be younger than late 50s, early 60s, right?
Yeah.
You have Dianne Feinstein, who is possibly not even able to do her job because of mental decline. And that's something that the way the government works is such that young people aren't cycled in at the proper age in order to have that kind of interfacing.
I completely agree.
To have that transfer of knowledge. I'm not going to say it's wisdom, because Lord knows politics in America is a mess.
I think the government, what you're saying, the government, a lot of them need to bow. It should have actually probably never entered politics. And they entered politics in a different world. But for me, when I think about the artist, it's really about the artist and how so many artists, I think, you know, you see them in a movie and it moves you, their performance, or you hear poetry, and then after a while they get their accolades or they collect their check or they get comfy with the world and they bow out. And people, they don't reach back to say, please come back and let us know what you're thinking, because you're still living. Let us know what you're thinking about politics. Let us know what you're thinking about love. And we still, I feel, need to know, especially because so many people, that especially in the Black community, that intergenerational exchange is gone. You know, people, I know I don't have that connection with even my grandparents to call them up and be like, can you tell me about what it means to live? Can you tell me about what I see going on the news? We don't have that. And a lot of people I know, they miss that. And so we want to be able to call you up and ask you, you know, what do you think about what you read now? Like,
We're welcome to call, and I don't, you know.
and you're here, yeah.
You're welcome to call, and I'm happy to answer because I got stories. I mean, that's what I do. And, but I have enough sense to know I am not going to stand up in front of some podium with a microphone and tell you what to do.
Right.
And my generation, the generation of segregation, we had to hear from people like Roy Wilkins, head of the NAACP.
Right.
We had to hear him say that Martin was wrong.
Right.
Right.
You know, it just goes on. Everybody, Martin,
Right.
for him, Mr. Dr. King, we got Southerners here, Dr. King was saying, you know, that SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was wrong. John Lewis was one of the great men, and John did the right thing. He said, I've taken my last march, I've taken my last beating, I'm going to run for Congress and I'm going to make a difference there.
Right.
And having John get, what would have happened if Martin had run for Senate? And the people you all's age need to be thinking about the politicians of it. And I like that young lady in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams?
Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, I just think she's wonderful. But I love the 3 women who started Black Lives Matter. And they just got together. And so I'm very proud of them. But